Hello and welcome along to the second episode of the Matchbook 2023 Cheltenham Previews. I'm your host, Daniel Hussey, back with the usual crew once again. Delighted to welcome Matchbook's Micheál, Deasy and Cheltenham Trends expert Matt Toombs. First of all, Deas, welcome back. It's 7 weeks tomorrow. Most people will be listening to this when it is 7 weeks to go to the Cheltenham Festival, and you're very excited.
Yeah, only just starting to see the old not long no hashtags and all that kind of stuff. It's getting close. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and Matt, look, people give out about the build up to Cheltenham, and I take that to a certain point pre-Christmas, but I think right now, like, this is the best time of year, and we even have 3 good weekends of racing coming up before we even get to that stretch before Cheltenham. So it's a great time to be alive in general as a horse racing fan.
Absolutely, and as you say, those 3 weeks are going to produce a huge number of clues and great anti-post opportunities for punters who can react quickly. So, great time of year.
Brilliant. Yeah, listen, we look forward. This week we'll be covering the Cheltenham Gold Cup, and thanks to those who got involved last week and watched the Arkle Chase, both on the podcast and on YouTube. But for those watching today, we do have a quick competition for new or existing Matchbook customers. We have a £25 free bet. All you have to do is comment any sort of comment on the YouTube video, be it your tip for the race, any sort of races you want us to cover going forward over the next few weeks, or any feedback for the show. If you want them shorter, if you want them longer, get involved, let us know. Comment on the YouTube video. So if you're watching the video, comment right now. And if you're listening on the podcast, head over to our YouTube channel and leave a comment. We will get straight into the Cheltenham Gold Cup before Matt covers some trends and the 3 of us give our selections. And we all have interest and fancies, potentially taking on the favourite here, Galopin Des Champs, who is 2.98, currently best price on the odds checker grid to be back in the Willie Mullins favourite. Noble Yates could be backed at 9.6. Incidentally, 8.0 is the next best sportsbook. We've got Brave Man's Game at 10.0, Absolute Tired at 11.0, Statler 11.5. You have Protectora, who was very impressive, Betfair Chase winner 12.0, Conflated 16.5, and we're into the big ones, Hewitt 25.0, Manila Indo 29.0, and Royal Pugai 60.0, who would have a chance definitely if the ground came up very heavy. So, Matt, over to you on this one. I guess give us your selection and a couple of trends and where you're sort of looking for the race at the moment, because Galopin Des Champs does set the market at 2.96.
He does, and he isn't a favourite that I'm desperate to lay. I think he could well prove the superstar, but he is very short, and it's nearly 10.0 of the field other than him. So there ought to be lots of anti-post value. And the horse I like at the moment is Brave Man's Game. He's the classic horse about whom I've changed my opinion during the season. I thought he was a suspect stayer, didn't find much off the bridle, but now it's looking more as if he's the classic Nicholls horse who wasn't hard trained early in his career before moving into open company over fences. And that's why so many of Paul's chasers keep improving at this stage. Brave Man's Game's just turned 8 and stays sweet into the veteran stage. If you were watching the King George and had never seen the horses before, you'd say Brave Man's Game is the stayer who'd improve for the step up to the Gold Cup trip, and that Long Press perhaps rode on with the speed horses. Brave Man's Game's first off the bit of those 3 when they turned for home, found lots of pressure, had Long Press his measure when that one unseated at the last, and Brave Man's Game looked as if the further he went, the better he was. I think that's the best piece of staying chase form so far this season. And in the Gold Cup, the current season's form tends to be underbet, with form from previous seasons, especially Gold Cup form, overestimated by the markets. So the trend here is that this century, horses that have recorded a Racing Post rating of 177 or more that season are 8 from 21, 61% profit backing those blind. That brings in Brave Man's Game in the King George and Protectorat in the Betfair Chase, bang on 177. They're £5 clear of the rest on this season's form. Their Galopin Des Champs on 172 may well improve on that in the Irish Gold Cup. And I'd have Brave Man's Game's King George form a fair bit ahead of the Betfair Chase form. I thought the Haydock race fell apart. Applutar bombing. Eldorado Allen isn't a Grade 1 horse, was beaten twice as far in the King George. So if I'm right, this is the horse with the best form this season, who's 10.0. And I suspect that inflated price is driven by the 2 obvious factors. Firstly, Paul said at the start of the season, the King George was his main target. Punters are saying others will improve past him in the Gold Cup. That could happen, but I'd bank on Paul's experience to freshen him up effectively again, whereas Protectorat, whose main target for the season was the Betfair Chase, was providing Dan with a first Grade 1 winner at open company. So it'll be a new challenge for him to get him freshened up and at his peak again for the Gold Cup. And the second thing people are talking about is that Brave Man's Game was only run at Cheltenham, was just a fair 12 lengths third to Bob Ollinger in the Ballymore a couple of years ago. that wouldn't worry me at all. Didn't look as if the undulations were an issue. He just shaped as if he wasn't quick enough for that speed test, and he was probably soft trained. So, as is often the case when you've got horses that have confounded your expectations during the season, I've still got a few nagging doubts, but I am confident he's got the best form so far this season. Step up in trip to the Gold Cup of 3¼ miles now looks a positive rather than concern. So I think he's the best value at this stage.
Yeah, and those couple of concerns, Matt, I was going to throw back at you, the Cheltenham form and the being tuned up for the King George. Deasy, where are you quickly with Braveman's game? I wouldn't have too much concerns on the Cheltenham thing, to be honest, but being tuned up for the King George are being the main target this season, where a lot of horses we will potentially talk about later, they'll only have one race in mind.
Look, neither of those things are bothering me. I think he's a solid bet at that price. I think he was really, like, I'm not going to go over it again, but I agree with everything Matt said. I thought he was very good in the King George. Paul Nicholls knows how to win a King George and then get the horse to win the Gold Cup. Like he was doing it for years now. I'm not saying this horse is as good as Coat or Star, but yeah, I think he's priced correctly, and I think that he is probably a small bit overpriced. And like I wouldn't be putting the house down to beat Galopin Des Champs, but I wouldn't be backing Galopin Des Champs either at the price. So I I think he's a solid tip. I think he looks good. This is probably his year to do it now. He's at the top of his form, and if he's going to win the Gold Cup, this is the year for it, I think.
Yeah, it's one of those races that if you do take a view that Galopin Des Champs is very short, suddenly a lot of horses do appeal at double figure prices. Decent of the next in the markets in that little section that we talked about, maybe that top 6 or 7 in the betting, you do like one at a price that might be a little bit still underrated by the market.
Yeah, I went up and down this a good bit. I thought this was tough now to find, because as we said with Galopin Des Champs, like he's the only potential superstar I think in the race, but he's too short at the moment. Maybe on the day might change my opinion, but he wouldn't be a bet for me at the moment. And what we're looking for here is value. At the end of the day, we're looking for horses that are going to be going off short on the day. And I kind of went through, like, nobody else, Plutard, Statler. I think they're all priced correctly. I think they're Protectorat. It was probably the one I would have least interest in. But the one I came down on was actually Conflated. I thought he was the only one that has a bit of juice in his price. He seemed to be kind of a late comer to the game. He's had 14 chase starts already, so he's thoroughly exposed. But I think that they obviously had a hard time enough for Fearless. He was rated 145 in December 2021, and he blew everyone away at the Dublin Racing Festival last year when he won the Irish Gold Cup. Beat Menelendus by 6.5 lengths. Was running fine in the Ryanair, but maybe it was too sharp a trip for him. He just didn't get home. Maybe he left a bit behind. And at Leopardstown, and again, he ran a cracker at entry behind Clan des Obo when he could have been a bit over the top. He has returned this year in as good a form as anything. And I thought at Christmas in the Savage Chase, I thought he was extremely impressive. I thought the way that he was the winner from a long way out. He had in the back straight. Once he took it up, there was no one getting near him. Ridden all the way to the line. I don't think there's any issue with him staying. Like he's by 8s. There's plenty of horses by 8s get more than 3 miles too. You're going to need to get 3.5 miles to win a Gold Cup. I think that's fine with him. He's 9 years old. He's probably at the peak of his powers. And I remember at Christmas, someone texted me and said Michael O'Leary is here today to watch Conflated. He never comes racing anymore, so they must think he's a good horse. So hopefully that's a bit of a tip in itself as to his ability. He's priced at 16.5. I can definitely see him shortening up. I think he could go off, on the day he could be half that price. So if I was looking for a horse for just to have a bet now that will shorten it and go off short on the day, Conflated is the one. And I just want to give a mention as well to something unique about this race. This is the first race where I asked Matt for a stat and he didn't have it. It was about Hewick. I was like, how have winners of the American Grand National ever won the Gold Cup? First time Matt has never had a stat for anything. So
I'll make a stab. It's none from none so far.
Hewick is a fascinating horse, and that is some story for Shark Hanlon for sure. And the fact he's going straight there means he's definitely going to have a runner on the day. And I can feel a bit of public money coming late on. And look, who knows on that one. Matt,
I think that's right, Dan. And he is an interesting horse in the sense that he's come the handicap route.
Yeah.
He's won the Galway Plate of 155. That's the fourth highest mark a Grade A handicap chase has been won off this century, and he would have won the Kerry National off 163, but for unseating at the last. Only 5 horses have even run off a mark in excess of 160 Grade A handicaps this century, and they're all well beaten. So because we're used to the big horses always being in the Grade 1s, trying to contextualise that form is very difficult. He's not an anti-post bet for me because he's very ground dependent. So, you want to see that he was going to get a sound surface. And Sharp did say the other day that Gold Cup will put him on spot on for the National, which would be a bit of a worry if you fancied him for the Gold Cup, because using that as a prep. But as you say, I can see some sentimental money coming for him nearer the time. And if he does get his ground and he is prepped for this, he's not out of it.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing for Hugh O'Grady is just such a good Gold Cup this year. Maybe in other years he could end up going off a 10.0 shot, but he's currently priced at around 25.0. Deasy's pick, incidentally, you mentioned conflated 16.5. The best price out there, and the sportsbook's 15, but it's a general 13.0 shot. So if you do want to play anti-post, this is a potential for a horse that could shorten. And very briefly, Matt, you were looking at conflated as a bet, and so he was on your shortlist, I guess.
Yeah, I like him. Basically echoing what Deasy said, it's because he doesn't have a sexy back profile. He was a bit quirky earlier on in his career, didn't know quite what he was going to do. But his last 6 runs have been excellent. There was a lot of talk about in last year's Irish Gold Cup, he won under a canny Davy Russell ride, which was true to some extent. But you look at that form Deasy's talked about against Allahu in the Ryanair, in the bowl against Clan des Obeaux, who got first run on him. Conflated was closing all the way to the line to go down by just a length. I didn't think Clan des Obeaux was hiding. I thought he was all out. So he looks like one who might improve, as DC said, with the Yates bloodline for the step up in trip. He's because he's unfashionable, I think he's a bit overpriced.
Yeah, and has that brilliant record in Leopardstown, which does sort of mirror Cheltenham to a degree, particularly if you do want to stay on that extra couple of furlongs that the Gold Trip ask you that question. I'm going to put up a couple of horses, and then Matt's going to give a couple of trends as to why these horses they'll have to book serious amount of trends. So I'm looking forward to that. But I am going to stick with my first selection, which is Statler. This is a horse that I really like, but have not made a cent out of, if that makes sense. I love watching him the way he runs through his races. He's a classy horse. He went off 7-2 favourite for the Albert Bartlett. Eventually finished 4th. So I don't think hurdles was ever his game. So, but since he's been gone over fences, he's been near perfect. Like, he was very lightly raced last year with the 3 runs, culminating in the National Hunt Chase. And I actually napped up One Royal Fred. I just didn't see Statler being able to compete with Run Royal Fred at that trip. I thought the experience over fences, all the old trends that we've kind of used for National Hunt Chase over the years, but the way Statler just blew Run Royal Fred and put that race to bed within 5-10 seconds, because turning in for a brief moment, I thought Run Wild Fred would be able to run the finish out of Statler, but he just cruised through the race. The trip really suited him. And obviously it's been the Gold Cup plan ever since that day for both me looking at a potentially putting on him, but also for Willie Mullins. And he gave him the Tremor trip, the same as Albion Photo. The only difference is, of course, he came up against a real tough campaigner in Minena Indo, having to give him £8 as well. And look, I thought that was a great run. And look, if the running was a little bit longer, I thought Paul Townend would have eventually got him up. But I don't think the Willie Mullins camp would be worried too much about the actual result. It was more getting that race into him, and I think that will definitely suit him. Interesting now where they do go, because there is talk that he'll go to the Irish Gold Cup, but I am kind of questioning whether he'll take on Galloping Deschamps there. But I don't really see another option for Statler to run. So whether they go the Albion Photo route and just go straight to the Gold Cup, which is probably my preference. But even if they did take him on in the Irish Gold Cup, I'd have no issue with him being beaten by Galloping Deschamps, but staying on to maybe be conflated into second and then going on to a Gold Cup, or if they go straight there. Whatever route they pick, I do think he's very overpriced at 11.5. The Albion Photo, he went off, I think, 16-1, 17.0 in the Gold Cup, and Julie won as Willie Mullins' second string. I know Bells Hill underperformed that day, but if there is a horse that can be Galloping Deschamps, it could easily be a stablemate. And I think Statler 11.5, I think he could go off second, third favourite at 7.0, particularly if he does have a strong showing in the Irish Gold Cup. And we have had Size and John do the National Hunt Chase and Gold Cup route. So, or Native River do the Irish Gold Cup, the National Hunt Chase and Gold Cup route. So I definitely think that appeals at 11.5. And the second is, having given £8 to this horse, it might be a surprise to some people, but I do think Minella Indo is still overpriced from the market. He does have that Cheltenham Gold Cup form. He obviously won the Gold Cup 2 years ago. Last year he finished second. Now, it was beaten, I think, up to 15 lengths last year, but I think Robbie Power wouldn't mind having that ride back. He did kind of go for the home too soon, maybe trying to run the finish out of Plutard, but he's the first and second in Gold Cup. He should have won an RSA if he didn't clatter the last and let Champ win there. And he obviously won the Albert Bartlett at a 50 to 1. So this horse has proven course and form. I think his run this year, even though he was in receipt of £8 to Statler, that was a fantastic run. I think that form will work out very well, given that I am putting these two horses for the Gold Cup. But I was surprised to see his price in and around 30.0 after the race, and it hasn't moved much. It's still around 29.0. By all accounts, he will go straight to the Gold Cup. So I think at that price, for a horse that peaks at Cheltenham, I think on the day, the familiarity with this horse, the money will come from, and I think you can see him going off 15, 16.0, and I really can see him finishing top 3 or 4 if one or two of these big horses underperform. So yeah, the two I am putting up is that Tremor form. We'll see how well that works out or not. It's Statler 11.5 currently with Matchbook, which I think is a really cracking bet. And if you do want an outside, that will be shorter on the day. I just can't see Manila Indo going off at 29.0 on the day. I just can't, even if everyone shows up here. So they're my two horses, Matt. What are your thoughts on them, first of all, and maybe go through some trends that might put you off a little bit back in these two horses?
Yeah, first, a quick aside. You talked about the National Hunt Chase and how Statler was a real trends buster. When you are using trends, it's really important that if the nature of a race changes, the trends may well not become relevant anymore. And there were only 6 runners in that last year. You look at the anti-post markets of that race, you could see a tiny field again. And all that experience of being able to jump in a big field of 15 to 20 horses and then going at a reasonable gallop. Last year, the 5 remaining horses, one of them pulled up early, were in a heap 4 out. So they'd gone very steadily. And class that Statler had was much more to the fore than Run Wild Fred's experience. So that's the sort of trend that you need to be a bit wary of now in that race. Trends for the Gold Cup, a couple that, would be a concern for your two picks. The first one of them is that horses that have run on officially heavy ground that season are 0 from 94 in the last 25 Gold Cups. Now, officially heavy is a pretty generic term. So 3 factors in that. Firstly, there's heavy ground and heavy ground. There's some heavy ground is loose. Horses get through, it's not too bad. On the flip side, at tracks like Clonmel, Limerick, Cork, Haydock, Chepstow, the ground can be dreadful, and even horses that win easily can get bottom for the season by it. The second bit is trip. Clearly running on heavy ground over 2 miles, much less likely to leave a mark than over 3 miles or further. And thirdly, when the heavy ground race occurred, generally the longer the recovery time, the less of a negative. So that would be good for Noble Yates, who had his 2 heavy ground runs in the autumn. If it's on a seasonal debut, might be more likely to leave a mark. It was only 2.6 at Tremor, but it was the seasonal debut for both Manila Indo and Statler. They did fought out a driving finish. So it's not like Album Photo having a school round whilst his stablemates complete at a respectful distance behind him. I'm not saying it's quite Ante or Cyaname, but just be a little bit of a worry as the prep for that. And then the other trend, it concerns the distances at which Gold Cup runners have been campaigned. Horses whose longest chase was over 3 miles, including 3 miles, half a furlong, 9 from 36 this century, 87% profit. Those that started at 10.0, a shorter 8 from 18, just over 200% profit, which ought to be a positive for Galopin de Champ after the Irish Gold Cup. And on a sound surface, speed's consistently underbet in the Gold Cup and stamina concerns are overemphasised in the market. That's illustrated by the fact that horses that have run over a marathon trip, that's 3 miles, 3 furlongs or further, are 2 from 100. And one of those was Native River, who won in a swamp when he was the only horse still galloping. So on a sound surface, sloggers rarely win the Gold Cup. You need plenty of class. I think Statler especially is quicker than most of these marathon chases. I mentioned that the National Hunt Chase developed into a bit of a sprint last year. So he might be one to buck those trends. But I would still be a little bit concerned that if we get a sound surface, there'll be another horse in the race that's a bit quick for him.
Yeah, it's fascinating, even if that is another trends buster. But I would definitely be concerned of the heavy 0 out of 94 in the last 25 Gold Cups. How could you not be? Dees, any other mentions before Matt has another selection, but any sort of thoughts on those trends and maybe the Statler, Manana, Indo, or any horses you want to give an honourable mention to? I know we haven't really touched on Plutard, who obviously won it last
year. Yeah, like Plutard is, I think, a fair enough price because he has to come back from a very disappointing run and then missing Christmas and vet's advice. I doesn't mention there about him not travelling, all this kind of stuff. He did not bother with that. He's won at Cheltenham twice, so he can definitely travel over. I just he's not something I'd be interested in until probably the day to see him turning up. Like if he turns up, he's probably going to be a small of a shorter, but there's nothing I'd be having a bet on. At bigger prices, I won't mention Matsman. I think Matsman is definitely overpriced, and he's a good call. Looking down the list there, like Galvin is 220 at the moment. He finished 4th last year. Now, I mean, there's a lot of talk that he's going to the cross country chase, but at 220, you could have a little minimum bet on him, and if he turns up, he's going to be 1/10 of that at least. If that's something, if that's the kind of angle you're looking for, but no, I think I'll be sticking with Conflated for the moment. It's a tough race. There probably is a bit of value further down, but I'm going to be looking at place markets, I think.
Yeah.
We'll just wait till they're up there.
Yeah, and absolutely. The best thing about betting on the exchange is that 24, 48 hours before a big race like this, when we have all those place markets, betting without favourites as well. So these sort of podcasts are really kind of trying to find a horse that could be a bigger price than he will be on the day. And I guess if a Hoy Senior gets there and nothing else, I guess purely on hype and familiarity again, which people kind of maybe underplay, but in Cheltenham it has to be a factor. Hoy Senior is definitely overpriced, surely at around 55.0.
Yeah, I've definitely done a little save on him. On the bare form of his 3 runs this season, he's the no-hoper his price suggests. Maybe he hasn't just trained on from novice to open company. But re-watching his races reminded me just how keen he's been and how at pains Derek Fox has been to rein him back in the early parts of his races. Yeah, almost in the manner of a jockey in a maiden hurdle trying to educate a young horse how to race. And Hoy Senior has been using his energy up in the first mile or so. So despite having shown himself a relentless galloper at his best last season, he's emptied at the business end. If they persist with the same tactic, he's no chance. But I wonder if this is a cunning plan from Lucinda and Skoo. Perhaps they've sacrificed all his races so far this season to try and get him to learn to settle a bit better. Then in the Gold Cup, they'll just let him go his own pace from the front, try and do a Coney Green, set a fast pace, gallop the opposition into the ground. If they change tactics and do that, he's got some sort of realistic chance. So given he's an enormous price at 55.0, I think he's worth a small saver.
Yeah, and again, he's a horse like that Aintree run. I know it's a completely different course, but just so impressive. He has the ability. I know sometimes he does jump like a snooker table. It's hard to get that snooker table picture out of your head when he does clatter one. But look, 55.0 could be a fun one to maybe throw a minimum bet on the Matchbook Betting Exchange. Matt, I think we're good on any of the horses. I gave the option to these. Any horses that were close before we head off on the long list or short list to keep an eye on in the Gold Cup?
More a couple to take on. I want to take on Protectorat. I don't particularly rate the form of last year's Gold Cup. If you look at the horses, he's finished right next to Galvin's potentially going the cross-country route. Royal Pagai's been beaten miles in all his Grade 1 races. Album Photo had to be retired. So he was really hard trained for that race in the Betfair Chase in November. I think it would be a brilliant training performance if Dan can peak in to win a Gold Cup. The other one, Dees mentioned this, Plutard. Yeah, he has had an awful lot of racing for a 9-year-old. People look at him and say, he's 9, he should be at his peak now. I'm not convinced that's actually going to be the case. It's his 5th season chasing. Only Quarto Star has won the Gold Cup this century's latest, their 5th season chasing. He was already pretty experienced winning it on his 14th chase start last year. That's the 3rd most experienced winner this century. He's running 2 Gold Cups. He's got a lot of miles in his legs. Now, if he does get there, it'll be with glowing reports. No one's going to run the Gold Cup winner saying, he hasn't been working well, we're going to roll the dice. So when that happens, I think there'll be a lot of money for him in the last few days, and he'll shorten up quite a bit. So if you like a back to lay on the Matchbook Exchange, you could take a chance on that now. He has got to get there. But my strategy more would be to wait for him to shorten up and then lay him for a place on the day, because I think he'll bomb out entirely.
Okay, and the final horse to not mention these, because my biggest fear is to do one of these podcasts and listen back to it on the 18th of March, the day after Gold Cup Day, to find out. We never mentioned Noble Yates, the winner of the Gold Cup by 6 or 7 lengths. He is the one horse that if he does win outside of Galloping the Champs, he might just win by 10, 12 lengths. A quick word on Noble Yates and Emmett Mullins being a Trends, but Buster.
That was my reply to the email about him. Yeah, look, he's been well tipped up elsewhere, and I think that's why he is the price he is. But I watched back his race there, his race at the Aintree there, where he beat Dashel Drasher and what's the other one? Like he won very well. He just sat him behind him and quickened away from the last. But he'd want to be beaten Dashel Drasher by 3.5 lengths, really. Like, I mean, the Dashel Drasher, he's a fine horse, but he's a handicapper. Again, I wouldn't want to be laying Noble Yates at that price. I wouldn't want to be backing him either. I think he's a bit short. But I think if there's any trainer out there, I've huge time for Emmett Mullins. I think he's a brilliant trainer. And if there's any trainer out there that can do it, we'll win the Grand National the first season, then we'll go win the Gold Cup. Emmett is probably the man to do it. And we have no idea of the ceiling of this horse. He's been cleverly campaigned. He was they threw him into the Ultimate last year, and he drifted out massively. Had a bit of money on the day, and went up in and bolted up in the National, beating Annie Second now, who had been absolutely laid out and probably should have won. He's a hard one to get a hold of, and I'm not pushing his price. I think he's probably correctly priced for all that. Maybe he shouldn't be second favourite. I'd say Brave Man's Game should be second favourite, but it's hard to know. I'd actually love to see him win. I'd love to see him win, but I'm not going to be backing him at this stage anyway.
Similar to Hugh, it'd be great to see a horse booking the trends in terms of campaigning a horse and going about a completely different way. Hewitt went the handicap route, but Noble Yates has gone some outrageous route, but it could end up being a trends buster there for sure. And you mentioned the price, 9.6 currently on Matchbook compared to 8.0 across the boards in the sports books. But look, for what it's worth, I think Staller could go off second favourite. So there's definitely those 4 or 5 horses in around the same. Be very interesting market to watch. My thanks to Matt, my thanks to Deasy for joining us again for the Cheltenham Gold Cup preview. Don't forget to comment, any sort of comment, any feedback for the show, your picks for the Gold Cup or any race you want us to cover. Do head over to the YouTube, comment now for a chance to win £25 free bet that will be in your account this time next week ahead of the next video, and maybe potentially to back on any of the anti-post picks we put up here. But for now, take care. We'll be back next Monday with a brand new race to preview in the Cheltenham Festival. It's only 7 weeks to go. Bye-bye.